So a quick round of introductions. We have, so this platform is really from a completely other perspective. We're now here to talk about the perspective of the platforms, of the surfaces, as we call them, that enable great AMP experiences, that give your content wings, as I would call it. And so I'm really pleased to have Zach from LinkedIn here to talk about what they've done with AMP. And then we have, and this is kind of cool, you know, so, okay, first of all, we have Marcelos from Microsoft, and specifically from Bing. And then we have Dane Knecht from Cloudflare, whose name you have heard before in the opening keynote. I would say the mastermind behind many of the AMP products that Cloudflare has been producing. And I want to start by giving each a little bit of time to explain where they've been coming from, why they have done AMP in the first place, why they have embraced it, and what their offerings are, and also what they've learned so far. And I want to start by just saying, I want to start with Marcelos, because so I've mentioned this a few times. I've been giving a few talks about AMP in the last couple of months, and I had these slides about, you know, companies supporting the AMP ecosystem, and every time I made the same joke. Hopefully, if you've seen many of my talks, it didn't become too repetitive, but I made the same joke saying, yeah, I've never thought that I, as a Googler, would stand here talking about Bing. And so it's been very surprising to me and very positively surprising to see Bing join the AMP ecosystem. And it's really a sign for AMP becoming more open in general and beyond just, you know, a Google thing. And so I'd like to hear from you first to see what your motivations were, you know, why we see this change at Microsoft, and please let me know.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here at the Google conference. I'm a group manager at Bing, and my team is responsible for the visual system of Bing.com, as well as the development of apps, primarily iOS apps. And last year, we took a look at AMP, and we saw that there was a significant, you know, increase in the volume of AMP. And we decided to collaborate with Google. We actually went down there to California, and we did a first implementation of AMP on the Bing app, which is a great app. It's a 4.5 stars app. And as in search, what you do is you never ship anything to production to 100%. You always do experimentation. You always do like A/B test, and you let the numbers tell you what you do. And we tried our first experiment with AMP, and the results were great. We did a lot of the tricks that have been talked here before. We do a lot of prefetching. We do pre-render. And when the numbers came, they were very green, very positive. Abandonment of the page went down, engagement went up, and that's when we decided to move forward with AMP. And I was telling Paul that you know, it's in my mind, it's part of the transition that Microsoft has been going through for the past 2.5 years with Satya Nadella as the CEO. The company is definitely much more open. You see a lot of people writing code for Android, for iOS. Azure is running like lots of virtual machines in Linux. And we are here, and that's part of the reason that I'm here. I don't know if it would be the case like 10 years ago, but now I see this positive change in the company. So we are very pleased with AMP. We just started embracing AMP into our platform, and we're not going to stop here. We're going to continue to move forward.
It's great to hear. It's especially great to hear that it was a logical conclusion, you know, that it wasn't just, yeah, we're different companies, so we're not going to do it, right? But it really was driven by analytical analytical measures, right? By A/B testing. So that's super good to hear. With LinkedIn, how was the story here?
Sure. So the genesis was, as any social platform, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you're trying to reduce bounce, you're trying to get people connected to content that they really care about. And so any performance improvements you can do, whether it's improving the time to load the LinkedIn app, right? You'll get more people who eventually view a news feed and engage and post and share. Likewise, if you can get people to content a lot more quickly, you reduce bounce rates, you reduce them app switching into another app. So we think about how we get people to come back to LinkedIn frequently, how we get them to read more content that they're interested in and share. And what we actually saw when we started testing AMP was that we were able to increase the average read time by about 9.8%. Which means that people are getting to content they like and staying there for longer. And then if you actually look at that distribution, we looked at bounce rate for 3-second and 10-second. Both of those dropped. And then we looked at like longer reads, 30 seconds or more on content, and that actually increased. So we were getting the distributional shifts that tell us, hey, we're getting to people to content that they care about more quickly. And then the nice knock-on effect as a social network is when people read a thing and don't bounce, they're more likely to share. So we actually saw a stat-sig increase in sharing, which is exactly the sorts of things we look at when we're implementing AMP or even features that we might build separately. So we've seen pretty good impacts on feed generally.
Cool. And so we had a conversation earlier where you told me that, and I'm really curious about this. So let's jump into this topic for a second. You created a separate version of the Lightning Bolt that is a little bit custom, and that you're using on LinkedIn. So what was the motivation behind that?
Sure. So on LinkedIn, you can sort of create content on the platform. We call it first-party content, where you can write a long-form article similar to like what you might do on Medium. And for that, we actually already have a really, really performant native reader. So in that case, there's not an incremental benefit for AMP. We can do a lot of the things that AMP tries to do, right? So we have it on our CDNs. It's fast. If we think you're likely to read it, we could prefetch it. We don't have a ton of JavaScript, all that kind of fun stuff. So what we ended up doing was we said, well, we want people to know that content is fast. And it really doesn't matter whether it's Facebook Instant Articles, AMP, whether they access it through Google or Bing or whatever else, or a really, really fast native experience on LinkedIn. The exact logos or style of the Lightning Bolt may differ across platforms, but it doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't really matter. What matters to an end user is this thing is to be fast. And so we didn't want to sort of give lightning bolts just to AMP stuff, but not to our own stuff that was just as fast. So we came up with a sort of similar-ish lightning bolt. We apply it to anything that we know is going to be really fast loading, whether it's AMP content or whether it's natively rendered LinkedIn content that renders in our native viewer.
Nice. I really like that idea. I mean, the fact that you're treating AMP as sort of a implementation detail. You know, initially we publish it as a developer brand too. You know, and the fact that you're highlighting user experience and speed, you know, as opposed to this specific thing, is really interesting. And I hope we can shift everything towards that way in the future. So now, Dane, we have heard about Cloudflare before this morning, but I think not everyone was here in the room at the time. So can you give us a quick recap of what you're up to and where you're coming from?
Yeah, so for those of you guys that don't know about Cloudflare, we have a giant edge network, 100 data centers around the world, 6 million plus customers, ranging from small free sites up to major media and financial institutions that are on us. About, I guess, a little year and a half ago, we get a lot of feedback from our customers that are always looking for us to kind of help them kind of do the things that Google's doing, Facebook's doing, best practices, and kind of help them apply it to their site without large development teams. One of the things that we were hearing a lot about actually was people were asking us, can we help them with ad blocking, anti-ad blocking? And we went and did some research. We kind of did some surveys. We found that, actually, to my surprise, the majority of people that use it for performance reasons and not for privacy reasons. And we kind of looked at ways that we could help in that. Help meaning kind of avoid getting hit by them. And we kind of took a step back and said that didn't really feel like Cloudflare. It didn't really feel like we were making the web better, because most of those solutions actually slow down the page even more to get those ads. And we thought the real root cause was slow web pages. And so someone came along and showed us the AMP pages, and we're like, this is what our publishers should be doing. Whether they're small or large, we need to help figure out how they can basically get users to sort of trust the mobile web as a place that's going to be fast and not want to go install ad blockers. So we set out and we started by actually just reverse engineering the Google's cache, because we wanted to be able to serve it from our network. We wanted to be able to preload it the same way Google can preload it for our publishers. And so I came out with that, then got involved with Google doing things with the ad network, the AMP ads, and then have rolled out products for platforms that also want to white label their own AMP caches, to also offering things for our free customers, where we actually are kind of actually a giant discovery network in ourselves. We have 26,000 sites that have turned on a feature called Accelerated Mobile Links, where we take all the links on the page and see which ones have the AMP alternative, and add the little lightning bolt, and kind of do that automatically. So we'll insert the JavaScript, we'll insert the viewer, we'll do the preloading, kind of everything you get on the Google experience, but for sites of any size. We roll that out. That's a free feature if you're on the platform. And really surprisingly, our paid customers turned it on more than our free customers in some very large sites. And then especially in the countries will kind of surprise you of where these kind of, they're very specific, so I could probably not surprise you, but India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil are kind of the top countries of the sites that are turning this on. And there are a lot of forum sites and places just where you see a lot of links, and AMP is a great kind of way for their users to see the content that they want and then kind of get back to their experience.
That's so cool to hear. I have to admit, so the first time I read about the Accelerated Mobile Links project, I'm like, I don't get it fully. But now that you explain it, it makes a lot more sense to me. And the fact that you're bringing the same advantages that we heard in Rana's talk, from the AMP viewer to the organic web, to web page to web page linking, is really interesting. I'm really glad to hear that a lot of people have embraced that. Very cool to hear. Now, the next interesting, I would say one of the most interesting questions to the audience, and to me as well, is the kind of challenges that you had and that you're still having. And challenges that you had implementing the AMP features, but also what you're still missing, what you still want from the project. Anyone, feel free to start.
Yeah, so in terms of Bing, the way that we implement AMP is once the query comes and all the results are ranked properly, then we actually do sort of what AML is doing. We go and we parse the page and we parse the results and we figure out which ones have an AMP associated with it. And whenever we find it, then we replace the URL, we add the icon, and then we also have a lot of conditions that we decide when to do a prefetch. For instance, you have to be on a Wi-Fi, and your Wi-Fi has to be good in terms of bandwidth. And also the same for the pre-render. So there's all that logic that we had to implement. And I think one thing that I was discussing with the Google AMP team is to see if we could make it an open source project for the viewer, right? Something that is smart, that we can collaborate. We have a lot of learnings in terms of when to prefetch, when not to prefetch, when to pre-render. So if that can be in a package, that would be interesting for us.
That's actually really interesting because, so I've been hearing from various completely unrelated parties over the last couple of days that they want to have an open source AMP viewer.
Right.
And the AMP team internally has talked about this for a few weeks. So I think this will certainly happen, and we'd love to have your contributions on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's kick that project off after AmpConf.
Fair enough. Once you've caught up on your sleep.
Yes, exactly.
On the LinkedIn side, I think we've seen two things that I think were a little bumpy. One was analytics. So if you have a publisher and you're directing all the traffic and you have a refer tag and they can see that it's coming from LinkedIn, or we can provide them analytics, that was what was working. When a lot of those URLs are now cdn.ampproject.org, a lot of that ceases to keep working in the same way. And so we had publishers who said, whoa, like our referral traffic from LinkedIn has like dropped a lot. And we're like, no, we're like implementing AMP. It's for the good of all of us. But ultimately, that was something where we had to do a little bit of retooling to make sure that we weren't effectively losing track of those people and effectively losing track of what distribution they were getting from LinkedIn, which determines how much time they spend posting content to the platform and all that. So analytics, I think, was one of the things that we had to sort of work through. And the second that is still maybe not quite where we would like it to be, and I think some of the publishers that I've spoken to here have mentioned it, I think Cloudflare's been thinking about it, is there is this notion, if I click on a link from Washington Post or the Business Insider or whatever it is, that it's their content and I should see businessinsider.com or wallstreetjournal.com. And I think you lose a little bit of that when you go to like cdn.ampproject and all of that. So we're using Chrome tabs, and so we still have this sort of AMP project URL. I know there were some recent announcements around effectively offering a set of URLs we could use, but I think that's still a point from like a member is on LinkedIn, they click on a link from the Wall Street Journal, they're at the Wall Street Journal. I think that continuity is maybe broken a little bit with currently the way that URLs are being displayed. So that would be one ask. And then a secondary ask, I guess, or secondary point would be, as a platform that relies on most of the value that we can provide of folks being logged in, all this stuff around authentication and all that probably doesn't make as much sense for us to sort of build LinkedIn in a totally amplified way on mobile web, relative to sort of the apps and stuff like that. So, and I think you see this if you look at like if you look at eBay, if you look at Eventbrite, like a lot of the other folks who have been here have said, cool, for the first hop, we amplify that, and then for the more involved stuff, right? Like we can't show you a great amplified version of your LinkedIn newsfeed, right? We rely on a lot of stuff of you being logged in and how we rank stuff. So I think there'll always be some limitations when you need to serve dynamic content, where it won't make sense for eBay to make their whole site an AMP just because you can't really get all the things you need.
That makes sense, yeah. But I'm just curious, what do you think about the AMP to PWA story?
I think it's cool. I think, if you compare to the set of things you can do in a fully mobile app, right? If you have iOS and Android developers and you can do a lot more, and you already have everything there, and you can do performance improvements and make that work really well, and you need people to be logged in, and you need a lot of these special hooks and photo uploads and all the other stuff, I think you're still going to see that exist in its current form in apps, to be honest. But I think it's good for the cases where maybe you don't need.
I mean, sure, we're always going to play catch up on the web when proprietary ecosystems can always operate at a faster pace. But I'm quite hopeful. We have a lot of things that we didn't have 2 years back now in the progressive web app story.
One interesting comparison versus Bing is we don't do any of the like prefetching stuff. And I think Google, I think you guys do some prefetching on some of the top results. We don't do that because if you think about it, you guys have intent, which is a super strong, hey, I want to read about this particular topic, and I'm pulling, I don't know, a couple results related to that I know are going to be fast. In a feed, which is much more of sort of like a discovery type of service, let's say, I'm making up numbers here, but let's say your likelihood to click on anything in your LinkedIn newsfeed was 5%. I actually don't really want to have to pre-fetch 20 things to have one of them load a second or two faster. So we haven't implemented that. There could be a world in which if we knew we had a super relevant thing at the very top of feed that you were like 50% likely to click on, that we would do something like that. I think to your point about figuring out when you should do that or when you shouldn't, right? That's actually like a probability calculation if you were to really optimize it. So we haven't implemented that just because of the dynamics of our system being different than the search intent that Bing or
And this actually gets, so the intent thing is actually interesting. Yeah, I see a point. This is actually harder on mobile than on desktop, because on desktop you can have the mouse be a signal. The direction and the velocity of the mouse, which is often used as a signal for pre-rendering and pre-fetching. But you don't have that on mobile because you will touch and you don't have a trailing hover state.
There's some fancy, if you really want to get fancy about it, you could look at dwell time of that story. So is somebody staying on that particular feed unit beyond, let's say, the average time they spend on other feed units, which suggests they're reading it, which suggests they're more interested, then you could trigger a prefetch. But that's probably a little bit fancier compared to some of the other feature work we could prioritize.
Just for clarification, so prefetch and pre-render, these are two concepts that are sometimes interchanged, but in fact, on the Google search result pages, we pre-render as opposed to prefetch. So prefetch is the first step where you basically just fetch the content in a network request. We could do that without the AMP cache. The pre-render step is actually the hard part where things get really tricky without an AMP cache. So that's why we need the viewer as well and things like that. So the pre-render is the thing that makes it really performant at the last mile.
And I think that was a mistake that we implemented. We realized in the beginning when we were doing like the prefetch and pre-render early last year, because we were pre-rendering. We prioritize pre-rendering from the cache, but in some situations we would pre-render from the canonical AMP URL, and sometimes that was a problem, especially like a year ago, where we would see like some sites that were not actually conform with the AMP rules. Then they would come with like this heavy JavaScript or things that we didn't know what to do, and then you pre-render that on a hidden web view, and then all sort of bad things can happen, right? If you have like this massive page with lots of JavaScript running, which you don't have any control of.
That right here is a nice advertisement for the AMP caches.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Don't pre-render if it's not coming from the cache. Yeah. That's a lesson that we learned.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because that's a huge reason why the cache exists. So now, Dane, I want to hear about the challenges that you had, and you built a solution for that problem, all right? But I also want to hear what are the things that you ran into that have been problematic that you want to improve.
Well, we kind of took it originally thought it was going to be a couple-week project where we figured we already do a lot of these performance optimizations, minifying, replacing JavaScript, doing some other validation things. We figured, okay, this will be a breeze in a few weeks. And then it turned out that the amount that the AMP cache does is just between rewriting things, between the validation rules, between the kind of the continual evolution of the validation rules. It turned out to be a much larger project than we expected, and didn't realize just quite how much you guys were kind of doing inside the cache.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge to actually, to make people actually be aware of all of those things that we're doing, while also making sure that they know that we're still following strict guidelines, right? We have created those AMP cache guidelines that you know very well, whereas where we say, for instance, we need to faithfully visually represent the content, which means that we cannot just sneak ads onto the page, right? But we can do things like image transformations, actually, to reduce the file size further. So that's why we've worded it quite carefully, say, without visual impact. But yeah, what's happening behind the scenes in the AMP cache is much more than just a single thing like validating or restructuring the content.
And then even more for the AMP ads, where they're literally things are being pre-calculated so that the JavaScript doesn't have to do it later on.
Yeah, that's right. So from the future, are there any things you would wish to see from the AMP project that would make your lives easier?
Well, for us, as we talked about, building that viewer together,
The viewer is a great
open
point.
source, that
Yeah.
would be like a good win-win for both companies, for sure.
I mean, we would love to help at least partially solve the CDN.AMP project problem for publishers that are using us, and we can kind of guarantee that it meets all those kind of cache guidelines, and as well as the data privacy aspect of it. We'd love to be able to kind of extend what we're doing on our cache to be able to do that on Google's cache as well.
Yeah, I would echo Dane's point around sort of, right? Because when publishers share to Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, right? There's sort of a couple things. Either they're getting more followers, more people following their content, but ultimately, like, they want the referral link. Or that generates one of two things for them: ads revenue or subscriptions. If I simplify the world, there are people who don't care about that, but like most big, successful commercial standalone publishers that are not like bloggers at home, like care about one of those two things. And I think in doing that, some of the ways that people do try and make their AMP site successful is by driving those subscriptions or whatever else, which means they want to retain their brand. And retaining either, whether it's a logo or whether it's their URL, I think that's actually important. In fact, if you look at Facebook's Instant Articles, they did not have a sort of paywall or some of the stuff that you could use to drive subscriptions in as focused, maybe is the nice way of saying it, a way as AMP had and does allow. And I think that was always, something that publishers had asked for. So I think maintaining the publisher brand. I think one other thing is we also see on some of the AMP articles, we lose some of the richness, right? So you can think about, and there's other ways you can get around it, right? You embed iframes or whatever, but right, infographics or interactive graphics or some of those things, which actually are really cool on mobile, and some of the things that differentiate, hey, this is an article about X. Instead it's, hey, this actually walks you through how these private equity transactions work, or how a self-driving car's LiDAR pings around it and figures out sort of where it is spatially. And I think some of that richness sometimes gets lost, and trying to figure out a way where people don't just have to drop all that stuff when they do effectively say, hey, I've got this piece of content, I want to share it out to AMP, to Instant Articles, to my mobile website, but I'm going to drop the cool stuff effectively on AMP and Instant Articles.
Yeah, I think half of that is probably misconception, to be honest. That AMP is just a thing to do really light experiences. Mm-hmm. But the other half of it is we still had some work to do. Yes, but I don't know if you've seen the AMP bind stuff yesterday. I think AMP bind will make a lot of these concepts possible, a lot of these interactions. Yep. So I'm really excited about it. I mean, you probably saw the chat app.
Yeah, it's cool.
The chat app is really impressive in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so I hope that we can see much more of that in the future.
Yeah, I saw the presentations. I think it's great that we're trying to add back all this richness to the page. For us, for platforms like Microsoft, like Bing, if we can keep the page like fast and very structured, but at the same time with the richness that we can have back, I think that's going to be great. I mean, for us, same as Google, right? The challenge is the non-structured data. once you have like structured data, that you can do a lot of interesting, cool magic to make the page load faster, more reliable. But when we have like a non-structured one and tons of things that you don't really understand, then it becomes a little hard. So I'm excited with the direction that AMP is going.
That's actually a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, but if we keep the principle of a light page, a mobile-first page, then we can do a lot of good things from the platform standpoint.
The whole structured data aspect to me is super interesting because, we have in AMP we have all of those much more high-level semantics, right? Where usually when you do an accordion on a page, it's just a div soup, right? Where you have like 50 different divs nested. But then in AMP, it is really one web component, and as a platform, okay, that person has an accordion on their page, or that person has an image gallery on their page. So I'm actually surprised that we haven't seen more platform experiences that use that fact, that actually really make use of it and say, okay, we're going to highlight images. We're going to build a specific experience around image galleries. And because we know which of these pages have image galleries, we can pull them out, display them in a really nice way. So I like that you talked about it. Yeah, so I think this is a really nice opportunity for platforms. Mm-hmm. So we're on time for the first half of the panel. So now, if you want to end something on a note, if you had something to say that you didn't yet, happy to give you the last word. Otherwise, we can open it for Q&A.
Yeah, I'd love to hear any questions.
Q&A, again, we have just a few questions coming on Slido, but I also want to give you all the opportunity to ask questions to platforms in particular live. So again, we have Lindsay and Melanie. Yes, here we go. On both sides of the room, please come ahead and ask away any questions you have. And I'm going to do the same thing again as yesterday. I'm going to go back and forth between online questions and live questions. So let's start over here.
Okay, I just had to ask, and being the first one up. So is AMP a search rank signal on Bing?
If it's a signal for the relevance, the ranking, no, it's not. We don't use that as a ranking. As I said, the way that we implement today, we let the rankers work the way they are today, so we get all the results, and right before we render on the page, then we do the AMP trick. We go and we replace any URL that has an associated AMP URL. Then we replace, we add the icon, but that's not a signal for our rankers. Not at all.
That's a really interesting
That's
question.
the same with Google, right?
Same with Google, yes. But it's interesting.
You said you guys had a carousel. You guys
yeah.
help it along a
Just
little.
a little, yeah.
But it was an interesting question. No, it was great that you answered it. Cool. Then we'll do a Slido question, and this one is for Dane. Does using Cloudflare ampersand mean that our pages are on our own domain and still be available in the Google search carousel and have a lightning bolt?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to that a minute ago. So basically, how it would work today is we would still be an upstream for the Google, and we know when Google calls the AMP page, and we don't do the optimizations in that case to let it do its own optimizations. But we do add in the things like the monetization things, like the VigLink integration, or any of the other integrations that you might have with Cloudflare. And then they just go into the Google Cache the same way as they did before.
Cool. And by the way, one thing I want to add to that, and I had this conversation earlier with some AMP team members. And doing AMP outreach, we realized that some of the outreach we did initially was the direction of it was maybe not the right direction, because you can do AMP outreach in two possible ways. You can say, hey, we built a JavaScript library, here, go use it, and then you get all the web developers to complain about all the things that all the constraints, right? But then if you advertise it as a content delivery format, similar to all the other content delivery formats like RSS, like instant articles, Apple News, whatever, then I think it comes away more favorable and as more open than the rest of the bunch. And so one thing that I want to mention is, and this came to my head earlier today, but let's say I built an app that uses Twitter, right? And I get a Twitter feed to display in that app, right? Twitter actually tells me in their API guidelines to cache those things because I shouldn't hammer the API all the time. So if you think about it purely as a content delivery format, then it's pretty obvious that any platform should cache the content in their own terms. Mm-hmm. But just one note, how you could also see it in a very different light. Anyway, next question. Thank you, Dane. Let's actually over here first.
Hey, I'm Gil, software engineer with Airbnb. Can you give a quick overview of what it takes to display AMP inside of the Bing app on iOS?
What it takes to display AMP inside the Bing iOS?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what, as I said, like what we do today, we already had the app running before we added like the AMP. And we worked with the Google team. We got the same icon. We worked with them. And we added like a little bit of JavaScript on the page that actually does what AML is going to be doing. And it parses all the news articles, and it figures out which ones have an AMP associated with that article. And if so, then we replace the URL, and we also add the icon there. And of course, we change some of our own instrumentation so that we can know, what is, which links we replaced, which ones we didn't replace. And that's how it works. I just want to add that when we started the project, like I think it was May of last year, we saw that the percentage of news articles on the Bing app that had an AMP associated with it was about 8%. So out of all the news articles that we had on the app, 8% of those were like AMP. Right before this conference, I ran the same query, and now it has jumped to 62%.
Wow.
So in about a year, we have seen an increase from 8% coverage for AMP to 62%. So that's a massive increase.
Yeah, that's massive.
I'm sorry, everything you described, it sounds like you could do that in a web view. I actually haven't seen the app, so is that what you're doing?
This is for the iOS app.
Yeah.
And it's in the view.
So you could do that on any platform, or no?
Yeah, but right now the implementation that we have is specifically for iOS. We do some tricks there because we have to do, we have other code that actually does the prefetch, for instance, and that's conditional over whether or not your network is good. So all that code is kind of combined inside that web view for iOS.
So you have native code and JavaScript code combined to do this?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Next question online is, again, for Bing. Any plans to integrate AMP into the Bing results outside of the app?
Yes. Right now, we only have it in the app, but we are running some experiments as we speak, trying AMP on the m.bing.com, which is the web version of Bing. And that's where most of the traffic comes from. By the way, Bing is, for those of you who don't know, it's the second largest search engine. It's it's behind the number one. But we have like 33% of the market share for in the US, which is significant. We are a profitable business. We make significant amount of money for the company. And based on the initial results of AMP with the app, which was like extremely positive, as I said, we're not going to stop here. We're going to try new surfaces that we have. One of them is definitely going to be m.bing.com.
Awesome. And now let's take another question over here.
Hi, I'm Serge from Yandex. I would like to ask you about your vision. Am I right that your Microsoft and LinkedIn have own cache for the AMP pages, or are you using the Google one?
Right, so right now we are using AMP project, cdn.amp project, right, which is the one that was built by Google.
But are you gonna follow the description of the cache itself and go and build your own cache?
If we're going to build our own cache,
Yeah,
is that the question?
that's the first part of question.
Yeah, that I don't know. Right now we're using the Google CDN, which has been working great for us. We have a good partnership with them. I don't know if that's in our plans, but as far as I know right now, things are working well with the Google CDN.
And what for you guys and LinkedIn?
Sure. We use the Google CDN, CDN.am project. I'm not sure that we'll build a cache anytime soon, right? I think to justify that, it's sort of like, hey, do we think there is either an incremental performance gain where like we can do it faster than Google, or is there some other optimization that we think we can offer, or something like that? I'm not sure that there's such a compelling reason to justify, right? Like, because our primary, right, what we're good at is at LinkedIn is like helping you connect to your network, finding people who you want to connect with, reading content. And so I think on some of those like performance optimizations for a cache, I'm not sure that there's enough benefit there to justify sort of doing that versus building a really cool new feature or introducing more interesting content types for interest in.
But since it's gonna be wider usage on your website, are you not afraid about the laying down on the other company infrastructure for provide the key service of your websites for Bing and for LinkedIn?
So your question is, hey, are you actually losing something pretty important by hitting the cache instead of owning it yourself?
Sort of, and you also need to be guaranteed from the other company that your business is not going to be ruined by the mistakes made by other companies, for example. So it's a question of safety and the full control of the stuff by yourself.
Yeah, so I think the way we've implemented it, especially without like prefetch, pre-render right now, really it's the same as clicking on a link to anywhere else. So we're not necessarily sharing the information that you're seeing X article, Y article, Z article in your feed, right? Because it's the same as you clicking on the link out. So I think because of our, call it more minimalist implementation, there's less of a, hey, here's the information on every single thing someone has seen in their newsfeed if it's AMP enabled. So I think there's probably less of a concern just given the way we've implemented it. I think it's an interesting point you raise. And if you went further down that path and said, shoot, who has access to literally everything I'm serving if I were prefetching and pre-rendering everything, I think that's actually a pretty deep question.
And I'll add 2 points here. One, before we use the Google CDN, we actually, of course, we had a conversation with Google, and so I think from a business-to-business standpoint, we had that conversation already. And number two, from a code standpoint, we implement our code in such a way that we don't have a strong dependency on the CDN being up or being available. So we have all the safety mechanisms. So, you know, if the CDN is down, then we go to the AMP URL. If the AMP URL is down, then we go to the origin URL. So any code that we develop there is very, it has all the defense mechanism in place to assume that things are going to, be down or not available to us.
But you're gonna check this online, like monitor the stability of the Google CDN. I mean,
Say it again.
you're gonna do monitor the stability of the Google
Yes.
CDN?
Oh, we do that. And
Okay, let me go to the second part of question about the component part itself. Are you interested in taking control of the JavaScript and CSS implementation of AMP controls as well as controlling the cacher part? Like, do you interested in implement your own AMP components library?
So the Cloudflare AMP cache, we do that. We actually serve all the AMP JavaScript off of the same domain that if it's our platform or if it's another platform that we're building for, when it white labels for them, the JavaScript is also served off their domain.
But you're not doing any transformation, like you're not replacing any of the JavaScript.
No, I mean, I think the integrity of AMP, you want to keep it up to date, in sync with that. We work actually really closely with the Google team to come up with a build system so that each week we're in sync on our launches and their launches.
I think the answer here is that it's possible to do so, but it's really impractical. Because yes, you could create your own JavaScript implementations for all the things that AMP does, right?
But if you create your own realization implementation of the component library, you can reuse the part of codes already you have in your website. Like you can reuse the core JavaScript from your Bing website, and also you can reuse the style guides and make the default components looks more like Bing style, not like a material design style.
So it is possible, but it's a massive investment.
yeah.
Yeah, LinkedIn, we have no immediate plans to do that.
I think the most saner choice would be to become a core contributor in the AMP project and actually, make sure that you have a voice in the AMP project itself.
And I think that's a direction that we want to go. We definitely want to contribute to the project as well.
Yeah. So before we have to fork everything, let's just try to figure it out together.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it's okay. Let's discuss it further. Okay, thank
We're
you.
happy to chat during the coffee.
let's move to the next question, but you can chat afterwards.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, then we'll do one more here.
Hi, I'm Michal. I'm a software developer from Makeup.ly. I have a question for Marcelo. Whether you guys are planning to provide in the Webmaster Tools ability to see how many AMP pages you know about on our site. I randomly just checked a page that I know it's showing up as AMP on the Bing iOS app, and it didn't show up for me. So what is my recourse as a developer to figure out what you guys think about my site and my AMP pages?
So I think we're talking about us giving like telemetry to the publishers about how many pages have been surfaced and clicked and so on, right?
I'm talking specifically about how many AMP
Validation.
pages on my site you have indexed and you know about, similar to what the Search Console provides for Google Index?
Yeah, no, I think we do have plans to do that eventually. We haven't done that yet because, as I said, like we only implemented on the Bing app. And even though the Bing app has been doing well, it's a very tiny percentage of our market, right? And as we expand and go beyond the app, absolutely we're going to be building portals and giving more information to the publishers, like the one that you were saying.
Just for my own sake and for the audience sake as well, do you have something similar to the Search Console, to the Webmaster Tools?
I'm pretty sure we do.
Okay.
I can't remember off the top of my
Okay,
head.
cool. All right. Great. Then I think we'll do the last question over here and then wrap up a little bit early so you can all have a nice lunch.
Hi, I'm Ryan, a web developer at Twitter. There's been a lot of talk over the past day about like responsive AMP pages and things, and I'm wondering, is anyone, search engines or LinkedIn, experimenting with showing AMP on desktop as well, given its speed gains?
Yes, thank you for that question.
Yes, maybe. We have kind of a roadmap of experiments that we're going to be trying. First one was the app, was successful. Second one is mobile, m.bing.com. And yeah, we wanna give that a try on the desktop eventually. eventually as well.
Just to know, you'll be my personal hero. Whatever platform comes up with a great desktop experience for AMP, it's going to be my personal hero. I think that's going to be amazing.
We haven't yet. I think it's an interesting idea. Never hurts to throw it behind an A/B test and see what happens. Is probably the way I would think about it.
So we, at Cloudflare, we have an internal Chrome extension that we use for debugging our own software. One of the developers actually just added in our AML code so that it gets inserted on every page on the internet that he goes to, so that he can get it on the desktop, get the AMP pages.
One thought that occurs though is, right, the whole point around richness before. If you talk to a lot of publishers and you said, hey, you've built this cool desktop experience where you have your like video player and all this related stuff and stuff coming in and maybe ways to entice people to consume more content and all those other things. I suspect, and I look forward to having some of these conversations over the next couple of coffee breaks, that's probably something that's worth discussing with the sets of folks who do invest in their desktop experiences. And like, let's take the example of like that really cool interactive infographic that right now, not all publishers do this, but a lot of publishers, if it won't work in AMP, they just toss it away, right? Do you want to lose that richness? If I actually am on a desktop, I'm less bandwidth constrained, I'm not battery constrained, and now you've actually maybe like degraded a little bit the content experience I have. So I think that's actually probably the really big thing that would probably give me a little bit of caution.
Good summary. And yeah, just one thing that I want to note, it's also kind of a chicken egg problem. So for once, platforms, well, there's two. So chicken and egg here is publishers don't really build for desktop with AMP because there are no platform experiences for desktop for AMP. And there are no platform experiences because publishers don't build responsively. So you both have an equal half of the job here to do. So publishers in the audience, please just build your AMP pages responsively so that we can have those experiences in the future.
Does Google plan on testing anything on the desktop?
I don't think so. So it's all the more important for you to do it. Anyway, I think that wraps up our panel. So glad to have you all here, Dane, Marcellos, and Zach. Very glad to have you. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please give them a round of applause.